Welcome to Classic 4x4, the podcast for and by truck and 4x4 enthusiasts. I'm your host and founder of Classic 4x4, Chris Piccone. Please make sure to review and subscribe to the podcast on your listening platform. Follow and like Classic 4x4 on Instagram and Facebook, and subscribe to our channel and check out our episodes on YouTube. Also, please don't hesitate to reach out if we can help you sell your truck or 4x4. Visit classic4x4.com for more details. Thank you for listening and enjoy the episode. Well, hello, Classic 4x4 podcast listeners. I'm your host, Chris Piccone, and I'm excited to welcome back the crew from Mount Zion Offroad for today's episode. So today we have joining us Mike Cashman, who's the owner of Mount Zion Offroad. What's going on, Mike?
Hey, Chris. Good to see you again.
Thank you, sir. And joining us today, who did not join us on the last episode, is the service manager, Curtis Weir. What's up, Curtis?
How are you?
Rocking, man. So I have had the pleasure, or I should say, you guys have had the unfortunate pleasure of having to deal with me for the past 6 months in my Scout build. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk about some pretty epic builds that you guys have had come through the shop recently. Like, you've had some really cool stuff come through over the past, 8-10 years in the shop. But now that you've built the new shop, your capacity has grown pretty drastically. And recently, you guys have finished like 3 or 4 pretty paramount builds. So I want to talk about those first. And then before we do that, to all our listeners out there, I want to make sure you check out Mount Zion Offroad online. Check out their website at mountzionoffroad.com. Make sure you follow them on all the social channels at Mount Zion Offroad, and check out their YouTube channel. They post some pretty cool stuff, especially those walkthrough Wednesdays. I'm a big fan of the walkthrough Wednesdays, and you can check them out on YouTube, also at Mount Zion Offroad. So, and for those of you that might be OG, long-term, loyal Classic 4x4 podcast listeners, you may remember that Mike and the shop foreman, Travis, yes, joined us in season 2, episode 10, where we talked lights, lifts, tires, and winches at that time, which is pretty cool. But you guys are back today, so let's get acquainted with everyone out there and start off the first question that we asked everybody. And Mike, I know you've answered this question already, but we're going to have you retread this one and answer it again. But let's start off with Curtis. And the question I ask every guest is, Curtis, what was your first car or truck?
My first truck was a 1995 Ford Ranger. But I shortly smashed it into a tree. So I then got a 95 XJ. And that's actually how me and Mike met each other.
Yeah.
That's cool. How did you guys cross paths with this XJ?
You were looking for tires?
No, I bought it and the crankshaft position sensor was bad. And Mike helped me figure that out and get one for it. So that's how we crossed paths.
That's cool. And did you previously work in the business, or as like a service writer, service manager, or how did you end up at Mount Zion?
So when I first started here, Jim, Mike's dad, is still probably quite a hoarder. And he would like take all of these parts and just hang on to them. And Mike would have me sell them on eBay. Sometimes Jim knowingly was okay with that, sometimes not. But parts got sold, and that was my job. So that's how I got started.
And we were both pretty young then.
Yeah.
I mean, we were probably, I don't even know what.
Shortly out of high school, really.
Yeah.
How long have you been with Mike and Jim and Mount Zion Offroad?
I've been here since 2006.
That's great, man. That's so like since the early days, like the original
04 was the start. I was here in 06.
That's awesome. Excellent.
Yeah.
And what are you daily driving these days, Curtis?
So I have a Transit with an awning on it. I use it to haul mountain bikes, camping equipment, whatever. It's kind of like I'm a van man now, so kind of
the family truckster.
Doing the van thing.
That's cool.
I like it. It's a good time.
And it looks good for a Transit.
It's got methods on it.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Are you going to do a four-wheel drive conversion on it?
No.
No. So, cool. We'll move on to you, Mike.
It gets me where I need to go.
With your mountain bikes, which is the most important.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, let's move on to you, Mike. What was, and again, from our previous episode, which you guys did 2 seasons ago, I don't even remember what your first car or truck was.
Yeah, it was an XJ Cherokee. I feel like a lot of guys in their, probably mid-20s to late 30s, if you were any sort of a 4x4 enthusiast and you were starting out with a first car and had like $2 to $3 grand to spend, that's what you got. And so I had a 91 XJ 2-door. I saw it at a dealer down the road, and it already had a little bit of lift on it. It had some TSLs on it, some steel bumpers, and a bunch of stickers on it from the local Jeep club. And so that had me freaking hook, line, and sinker. Not only did I buy that, but I got involved in the Jeep club and started doing a lot of four-wheeling, and that was kind of the start. But it was an XJ Cherokee, just like Curtis, and probably a lot of guys in our age demographic.
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head, is that there was a point where XJs were actually affordable four-wheel drive vehicles. Those days are especially recently long gone. I'm starting to see out in the market like any XJ clean, rust-free, under 100,000 mile XJ, especially like the country models. Remember the country models with those
Travis has
looking like kind of spider web wheels. Like those things are doing bonkers numbers, and we're talking like over 25 grand these days.
Yeah. I remember there was a time that Curtis and I were having a conversation about that. It was probably 3 to 5 years ago, and probably closer to 5. And I was like, you realize right now the XJ Cherokee is at the bottom. It is the cheapest it will ever be. And so you could buy one now and keep it for 5 years and sell it for the same money that you're paying for it. Never again will an XJ Cherokee be worth this. And so maybe that conversation was longer than that, but I remember that.
But hey, you added an XJ Cherokee, a built XJ Cherokee into your personal collection for a pretty good number. Before the show, we're talking about how you should never sell it because you'll never get that back again for anywhere near that number.
No. Yeah. I love it. The things, we built it for a client, and it's just got Curry axles in it and 37s, and the thing's it's just awesome. We are working with a company called Roof Space for rooftop tents. So I got a new rooftop tent, stuck it on top, and we headed out to Western Maryland, to Green Ridge, and did a big camp out overland trip. And it was a ton of fun.
That's cool. And there's I'm not going to name what it is, but you have something in your personal collection, which is a Hallmark truck, which might be leaving your personal collection soon. We're not going to talk about it. We'll go, so you guys might see it. I might be representing the sale. I might not. I don't know. But this thing is bonkers. It is cool.
Yeah. Yes, you will definitely see it. We've got a couple punch list items that we're tidying up, and I think we'll have it wrapped up here before too long, and then we'll get it listed.
Yeah, it's all words that Chris is too familiar with.
Yeah.
Punch list items.
Punch list items. You know all about that, Chris.
Oh, I know all about punch list items. I'm about 4 months deep in punch list items right now, right? But I got to tell you, like building the Scout with you guys were doing the drivability portion of that Scout build. You guys did an excellent job, and working with you guys was an absolute pleasure. Yes, Mike, you and I have become friends over the years, which is awesome, but I really dealt on a day-to-day basis with Curtis. And one thing that I think separates you guys from any other shop I've ever worked with is not only were you very realistic on your timeframes and the execution, but the communication was absolutely second to none. That system that you guys have in place where, Curtis walks through the shop every day and takes pictures and gives and texts the pictures and the status updates to all your clients is second to none. It just makes you feel good and part of the process. How long have you guys been doing that? Like, how did that become part of your process?
That was so we have a customer that came to us maybe
5 years ago.
Yeah. And he basically required that. And I at first was kind of annoyed by it, but then I realized how good of a thing that it was and just kind of adopted it into the everyday routine. And it's been something that's very, very good for us.
And now something that's mandatory. It's like it is a part of the experience here. And we've talked about before, both of us have had kids in daycare, and like we've got picture updates and like we really care about that because it's something we're vested in, and our kids mean a lot to us. And for a lot of people, specifically our clients, their rig means a ton to them. And so,
just
understanding
as much as their kid, like, maybe more.
I mean, my kids are my truck collection and my dogs.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, man.
Right. And so, we felt that the same attention to detail and the same care and the same updates, it goes a long way. It really saves a lot of surprises at the end. It makes you as the owner and client feel really invested, that we've taken you along the journey and you've helped make the decisions that have formed the build. Many people want to be part of the build, and there's no better way to do it than daily updates and just an open stream of communication throughout the entire process.
And that client 5 years ago that required you guys to do that, did you a huge service, whether you realize it or not. Yeah. And what's great is you guys realized how important it was and how effective it was and how important it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Curtis has some family that's big in collector cars. And we were talking about it before that, a lot of the shops that he even works with, they don't do that. And I thought, man,
they don't even call them. It's like he has to call them to figure out what's happening.
And so, even when you do call them, they don't even return your phone calls.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what do we need to do to be one step ahead? I feel like if you're comfortable, then you're complacent. And so we've always been kind of pushing that boundary about, what do we need to do to stay next level, to stay aware of our customers' needs. And that was just one thing that we implemented. And I think I know that it's been huge. Yeah.
I mean, I'm telling you firsthand, as working with you guys on a build, it is absolutely huge. It's something that I implemented, at Classic 4x4 with my clients when I first started doing it, was because I like it is weekly updates. Like if I have a client's vehicle out in the market, they're getting a weekly update. Like, hey, I got, some inquiries this week. This is what I talked about, or I didn't get any inquiries. We need to talk about, change of strategy, stuff like that. And, just because that's what I like, but nobody else ever does it. Like I've worked with build shops before where I have, I've made phone calls for weeks on end, nothing's returned. And then magically 8 months later, I get a phone call that's like, yeah, you owe me this and you got to come pick up the vehicle. And it's like, well, where have you been I dropped it off 8 months ago and haven't heard from you in 8 months. Like what's going on? And no matter how good a shop is, if that's how they manage themselves and they manage their business, I can't work with you. Like my OCD does not allow that. So I really appreciate that. That's huge. And it was a great experience building the Scout with you guys. But before we talk about the Scout, you guys have had some pretty interesting builds in the shop recently. I've been in your shop. What amazes me with your shop, how many bays is it?
9.
So you could eat off the floor in every single bay. Like it is impeccably organized. It is it's impressive. It's very, very impressive. And you've had all 9 of those bays circling in and out active for many years. But some of the builds that you've had come out recently, when the first one I want to talk about because it's pretty cool, is I think it was a first or second gen Ram dually that you guys built from the ground up.
Second gen.
Yeah. So, and what was it? A 3500, 2500?
Yes.
It's a 3500 dually. It was interesting. I got a text from a client that we've worked with before. He's got Raptors and some other really cool stuff. And he sent me a screenshot of a Dodge dually. He's like, hey, I just bought one of these and I want mine to look like this. It's like, cool. All right, no problem. I'll get you a quote. We do it. I order all the parts. We get the truck in. We put it up on the lift. And it was just a real mild build, like lift wheels tires, like in and out in a week. No big deal.
This sounds pretty familiar with somebody else's Scout build, right?
Yeah. So we get this thing up in the air and Curtis is like, Mike, come look at this thing. And so we get it up in the air, and it looked like it was parked like on the on-ramp at your house in the ocean.
Yeah, it's
it was like there were fish plates on the frame. The frame was all scaly.
Body mounts rotted out. It's terrible.
And so Curtis came to me. He's like, I get the vision that the owner has for this truck, but this isn't the one. And so I reached out. I was like, hey, man, this truck's rough. If you want to do this, we got to have a larger conversation about holistically what we're going to do. And so the gentleman that owns the truck owns a bunch of paint and body locations, independent locations, and had just had the whole thing painted. And so it was like, man, the body and bed looks really nice, but the frame and chassis are terrible. So at that point, we made the decision, of course, with the owner to start over. And so we not entirely started over. We took the cab and the bed off and got a new frame. And I mean,
replacement used one. Yeah,
not a new frame. I don't know you could even get one anymore, but we dug around, found a frame, had it blasted. Through the conversation, it was like, I think we could stick 3rd generation Ram dually axles in this thing, and they basically bolt in. And so we made that decision and put some 37s on it, American Force wheels. The owner worked with a local diesel shop to build, completely nut and bolt, rebuild the entire engine. And
plus compound turbos. And, it was wild.
It got wild really fast. And the thing has, now that it's done, we delivered it last month, just gobs of power. I think it's probably in the 600-700 horsepower range, 12 to 1400 foot-pound of torque. And it's a manual trans 3500, all mechanical Cummins diesel. It's just a blast to drive and just sucks you into the seat. It's awesome. So we've got a few round 2 on that truck coming up October 1st. We're going to be starting back on it.
We had somebody doing some interior work on it, and we're going to finish up the electricals inside, power seats, heated seats, putting different gauges in it, that sort of thing for them.
Yeah. So a wild build though. It turned out really awesome. Really awesome.
It's a beast. It's an absolute beast. And hey, it happens. Like, you have to pivot sometimes, it's like renovating a house, when you start to pull the walls off, you're like, oh, there were some termites here. We have a problem there. But it's the way you go. You just got to deal with it as you go. We're going to talk a little bit more because a lot of that happened. Fortunately didn't have any rust issues in my Scout, but we had some metal issues, and we'll just leave it at that because we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But you guys also had a new Bronco, like a 6th gen new Bronco 2-door build in the shop. Tell us about that. I like the color of that truck, but you guys built that to the max. What were the specs on that?
So that was a Heritage Edition Bronco, which is why it was that color. The vehicle came to us from a gentleman in Pittsburgh. We were kind of going back and forth on how to get 40s underneath of it. Originally started with doing just a rough country 7-inch kit and spiraled into putting portals from 74 weld under it, and then king coilovers to get the 40s underneath. We did skid plates, bumpers, onboard air,
lots of lights.
Lots of lights. We got
15, 18 lights. I don't know.
Every light Baja Design sells.
Yes.
It was cool.
That's awesome. And I don't know. I'm a big fan of the 2 doors because you don't see the new 2-door Broncos a lot. You see mostly all the 4 doors. And the Heritage Editions are awesome. Was it a Heritage Edition or a Heritage Limited?
I think just a Heritage Edition. I don't think it was a limited.
Did it come to you with white or black wheels?
Black wheels.
Oh, so it probably may have been a Heritage Limited, actually, because I think the Heritage Editions just come with the white wheels, whereas the Heritage Limiteds, I think, come with the black wheels. So
it's possible. I mean, the thing had a lot. It was, loaded up pretty good.
That's cool, man. That's awesome. That's another one. And then another one that you have in your shop, which I saw personally when I was out there a while ago, which was in like kind of the part stage, meaning you guys were kind of collecting all the parts and sourcing all the parts before you did the build. And this is again another ground up build, which is like this. Am I right in saying it's a Jeep YJ rock crawler? Like that's the ultimate goal for it?
Yeah.
What's
the
the
thing
specs on that one?
It's kind of a unique story. The thing is what, an 89, 90.
Yep.
And the owner bought it right after new, maybe like in 91.
Yep.
And owned it through college and, young family life. And then his wife got a job moving all over the country. And so this YJ ended up never getting finished, traveling all over the country for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And so he reached out to us and said, look, I want to finish this thing once and for all. And so we came up with a game plan, and
which involved ripping off everything that everyone has ever done to it and redoing it all.
Yeah, which was starting over from scratch. So I would say starting at the very, very ground level, we used Ultimate 60s, Spicer Ultimate 60s. You can get them bracketless. And so that's what we chose to go with. And then a modified factory YJ frame, utilizing a lot of components from Genrite for their control arms, coilover mounts, brackets,
their mounts specifically,
their cage.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got a couple builds, I don't want to say similar, but somewhat similar on that they've done and highlighted in their showcase section. And so, we're going to be using the massive 43-inch Mickey Thompson Pro XS tires on it that are just the thickest, meatiest tire you can buy right now. So the thing is absolutely gnarly looking. And, we used Highline fenders and a real flat cut hood. And it's just going to be a real menacing, mean, nasty looking YJ.
Is there anything on that truck that you didn't touch? Because like I saw, Eric the other day was doing a new wiring harness in it. You guys pulled the bed off the frame. Like, is there anything you didn't touch in that truck?
No, we've had everything.
It's the original engine that he brought it with, but
we had to take it out. It needed rebuilt,
So kind of the original block.
Yeah, it's got new heads. Yeah. I mean, it's all.
But it's gonna have fuel injection. Obviously, it's coilovers all around. 43s, Dana 60s, hydraulic assist steering, full cage. We're gonna do our dash like we did in another YJ project. Mm-hmm. So it's a full custom dash with
the blue YJ that you had in the showroom. Yes, I love that. Yeah. Yep. So
integrated console, kind of.
Console's separate because it's a stick shift.
Oh, a manual transfer. Okay, yeah. PRP seats. We did a lot of custom upholstery work on door panels, armrests, visors. All of that matches the PRP seats. It's a real kind of black and white themed project. So the whole the whole interior is going to be black. The whole exterior is going to be this like Lexus pearl white.
That's right.
So it's going to be killer when it's done. I would say, I hate to put time limits, but if we could finish it up by the end of 24, that would be ecstatic. But it may go into early 25 to get it all done.
And what amazes me, and I got this question a lot because when I had happened to post that, like I was bringing the truck back from Mount Zion Offroad, and a lot of people know that I live in coastal New Jersey. You guys are obviously in York, Pennsylvania. And I got a lot of questions. People were like, why send a truck to, all the way out to York, Pennsylvania to get work done? Don't you have anybody close to you that you trust? You're a part of the enthusiast community. And it was interesting. The answer was no, I don't. Like, I've worked with several shops around me in the past and been, there's a lot of really good shops around me, but they just don't manage their business correctly. They, set the bar too high and just, completely under deliver. Like it's just, and it got to the point where, it makes more sense for me to literally put my trucks on a transport vehicle send them out to you guys in York, Pennsylvania, have it all taken care of, and then transport it back to me in New Jersey. Are you seeing a lot of people do that recently?
I wouldn't. I mean, I would say, we see our geographic range growing over time. I would say maybe 10 years ago, we got anybody within an hour, and then 5 years ago is anybody within 2 hours. And, today we're probably anybody within 4 hours. Seems it justified to come to us because, of the quality product that we're cranking out, but also the communication that we do before. We spend a ton of time posting and creating organic content for all of our social platforms. And so people get a real transparent look at what we do, what the inside of our shop's like, who we are, how we interact, what projects that we're working on. And so it just builds a lot of customer confidence in who we are and what we're doing. And so I think from that point, it makes it a pretty easy decision. Oh, hey, it's not going to cost me that much more to get this to people that A, are passionate like I am, and B, are going to crank out an awesome product, and so I would say, and Curtis could probably echo that we've seen that geographic distance grow. I mean, we've had even some oddball stuff. Like we had a guy ship us a truck from Chicago just to align it. Now, it was not it seems crazy, but I mean, it wasn't your run in the mill alignment, I mean, to us, it's your normal stuff, but like, when you get 6 different components that are all adjustable and a truck that's got 8 inches of lift, there's a lot that goes into it. And that's normal to us. That aligning something like that is normal. To most shops,
It scares them.
Like, we can't do that, which blows my mind. I mean, we've got a state-of-the-art alignment machine made by Hunter Engineering. It's the same alignment machine that you'd find in any new car store, right? We spent an extra, let's say $3,000 or more to have all the right adapters so that like we can align anything. It doesn't matter the wheel width. It doesn't matter the tire size. It doesn't matter the length within reason. We can align anything. So it blows my mind that shops are willing to invest 50, 60 grand into having the right alignment machine, but not invest the rest of it to be able to, I don't know, maybe that's just why we're a niche shop. That's why we like doing this stuff. Like we really could care less if we align an Acura MDX, but what we like aligning are custom, lifted, lowered, adjustable, weird stuff. It's just what we live and thrive on.
That's cool. And that's actually a good point you bring up, like when you talk about aligning the MDX. I mean, and what's rare, I think, for a lot of shops of your caliber is most of the shops at your caliber are just doing big builds and won't touch the little stuff. Whereas if you have a local guy with a Jeep who just wants some wheels and tires and an alignment, or like a small little, has a death wobble that wants to get taken care of. I mean, you guys will do everything. You're not limiting. You'll help everybody across the entire spectrum, which I think is rare.
Yeah, I think we serve this 4-wheel drive custom off-road community really well. I would say that is more of our bread and butter than these custom massive builds that we do. The 3-inch lift on a 4Runner, the 12-volt accessory stuff, the custom alignments, the re-gearing, stuff that you can get done in a week or less. That's our normal everyday kind of stuff.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So now that we've talked about some of those builds, the reason we're doing this episode is not only am I so appreciative that you guys did, took care of my 1980 Scout, handled all the drivability portion of the build, but I got a lot of questions about it, and a ton of people just sending me messages like, "Hey, what did you use for this? What did you use for this? I have this Scout." And I basically was like, I'm just going to do an episode and we're going to talk about it from top to bottom. And I figured this is a great opportunity and a great forum to do it. So for those of you that aren't aware, let's take a step back and talk about.
I was going to say.
Yeah. So
number one.
It did not start with a 1980 Scout, right?
Right.
So it's interesting how and I want to talk about how we know each other also, because as time has progressed, like I consider Mike a friend now, not just, somebody I know from the business. And how it all started was when I launched the podcast, years ago at this point, and it really started to chart and get really popular. I started to get calls from a lot of like agencies, PR agencies, digital agencies, marketing agencies that were like, hey, I want to get my client on your podcast. I want to get my client on your podcast. And sometimes it fit, sometimes it didn't fit. But at the time, you were working with a marketing agency that had reached out to me and said, hey, I have this client, Mount Zion Offroad. Like, I want to get him on your podcast. And I said, all right, we can, and we had talked and we'd found and I had not really known you guys. I'd known of you, didn't know you guys. We have a common friend, Jason Miller. Yeah, we have a common friend, Jason Miller. Jason Miller, I think you sold Jason his first YJ, his first car.
Yeah, probably.
All of you out there, Jason Miller, you can follow him. It's 65 CJ5A. He does a lot of great truck content. But I had actually bought one of the trucks out of his collection and did a restoration on it. So I had heard of you guys, but didn't know you guys. This marketing company was like, we want to get our client on your podcast. I said, okay, whatever. We, came up with the idea to talk about lights, lifts, tires, wheels. And we had a good conversation, but through that, we started to, get some rapport with each other. And then one day this is probably 2 years ago, I had been working on a guy that had a 1973 Scout in your area, in like the York, Harrisburg area. I'd been working on to try to buy this thing for like a year and a half, 2 years. And then finally one day my phone rang and the guy was like, I need this thing out of my garage. I'll sell it to you for what you're willing to pay for it. Get me a wire and just get it out of here within a week. Like, he was fed up with it. I was like, boom, done. I hadn't seen the thing in a year. And it was a little bit different than I remembered, but hey, whatever. I knew it. And it had this like crazy paint job on it that I loved. The body was really solid, but like everything else needed to be done and touched. So it just happened to be like, 5-10 miles away from you guys. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna send it to Mike. I know Mike, have an okay relationship with him. You guys are gonna go through it and let me know what it needed. And you guys went through it, did a great job, and it needed a lot, right? Which I was willing to do, pretty much almost what I did with this Scout, right?
Yeah.
And I was okay with that. And while this was all happening, what ended up happening was a client of mine who's an importer out of South America, who I represent the sale of a lot of his Land Cruisers that he builds out of South America, imports here into the States. And I at Class 4x4, I sell them for him, called me out of the blue one day. And he's like, I have this FJ45 Troopy that's in my shop. I was building it for somebody. They backed out of it. The chassis, it's a rolling chassis. The whole powertrain, suspension, brake system is on it. It's ready. The body is in primer. I just need to paint the body, put the body on the chassis, hook up the wiring harness, put the interior in, hook up the systems, the gauges, and it's done. But I don't want to do it unless I have a buyer on the other end. Do you have anybody that, in your Rolodex that would be interested in this truck? And I kind of thought for a second and I was like, I'm doing this Scout project with Mount Zion right now. We haven't started it yet, but I kind of want an FJ45 Troopy. I remember I call up Mike. I'm like, hey, Mike, yeah, we're not going to do that Scout project. I'm going to do an FJ45 Troopy. And you were like, okay, that's cool. So I ended up launching the Scout project to ironically, a woman who's a fashion executive, lives in Texas, who is doing the build right now, almost as we spec'd it out in Texas. So sold it to her. And then I made the mistake. I had a client of mine who I was representing the sale of one of his vehicles, and I made the mistake of opening my big fat mouth and telling him that, I was building this FJ45 Troopy in South America with one of my importer clients, and he's like, "Really? Tell me more." And so I went through I didn't realize, I thought he was just interested in what I was building. So I told him I went through everything, and he's like, "I want it." I was like, what? He's like, I want it. I want, you're going to sell it to me. And I was like, what? And he's like, I want it. Like the way that you spec'd it, the color, the interior, everything. I want it. You're going to sell it to me. And I was like, no, it's for my own. He was like, yeah, no, you're going to sell it to me. Just tell me what the number is and you're going to sell it to me. So I threw him a number and he goes, didn't even flinch. He goes, cool. When can I get it?
Let me know when it's ready.
Yeah, I was like, okay. So now I don't have the 73 Scout project. I've already sold that off. And the FJ45 I don't have anymore because I had another client who wanted that more than I wanted it, apparently. So I had nothing. So then I had been working on a gentleman who had this 1980 Traveler, Scout Traveler for a while. It's actually a pretty crazy story, but I was driving up. My wife and I spend our winters in Charleston, South Carolina. I was driving up from South Carolina, called the guy and was like, hey, man, I'm going to be passing by right by your house in Maryland. And this is your chance to sell it to me. And he goes, your timing's good. Just come look at it. You know, we had already agreed on a number. That's a whole nother story. And I went, looked at it and bought it. And that was what, February? Did I called you and said, hey, I got another Scout coming in?
Yeah, I think that was about that time frame. And to be honest, I wasn't surprised. I mean, it just happened organically that it was a Traveler, but I kind of remember a conversation you and I had about the last one. And, you know, I was talking about how I kind of had this affinity towards long stuff. And I was like, man, if I was doing one for myself, I think I'd be looking for a long one. And we kind of had that kind of discussion back and forth about that. And then the next one that came along was this Traveler. And I loved it. I think it was awesome to see. I know towards the end of the project, it really grew on Curtis. He's like, you may be surprised to hear this, but I kind of like it. I kind of like driving this thing around.
I liked it.
Well, so, I mean, Curtis, you've driven this thing more than I have. I've only had it for a week. Probably. You've been driving this thing for a couple months now.
Well, yeah. I mean, on and off it, when I would drive it, it seemed like something would always go wrong. So then it got parked until, we could address whatever that was. But yeah, I drove it a bunch. My daughter, when we, I think I had sent you a text about it, but when we sent it on the rollback away, I told her and she was crying. She really, really liked it. So
don't tell me that. That's like heartwarming. That tugs at my heartstrings right there. Well, that truck actually, I don't know if you guys know the backstory, and I think it'll be cool to tell the listeners about. So how I ended up finding that truck, and that truck was actually originally purchased. This is the coolest girl dad move in the world. That was bought by a father for his daughter as her daily driver for 2 years in high school. That's actually where that, yeah. So long story short was how I ended up finding this truck was I saw it actually, part of my role at Classic 4x4 is I'm constantly looking at the markets, auctions, what's trading out there. I sit in front of multiple screens every day, just watching what's trading and where it's trading at. And I saw this 1980 final year International Harvester Scout Traveler that was up on Bring a Trailer, and it didn't sell through. It bid to the right number, but didn't sell through. So I have this sneaky little way, which I'm not going to give up, how I can kind of, though there's, the seller is cloaked in anonymity. I have a sneaky little way of figuring out who the seller is. So I kind of figured that out and contacted the seller directly and said, hey, I just saw that your truck didn't sell through on BAT. Like, hey, I'd be interested in it. And he said, well, this is where I'd sell it at. And it was a number that was double, not only what it was worth, but where it high bid on BAT. And I said to him, hey man, like, where did you get that number from? He's like, well, I had a great guy, awesome guy, not really a car guy. His name's Andy. Shout out to Andy, coolest guy in the world. But Andy basically was like, Andy's an accountant and he's very analytical. And he ended up having a valuation done by a quote unquote accredited, historic vehicle appraiser, right? So he sent me this valuation, and this valuation, Andy, I love you to death, and I think you know this now, was absolute garbage, right? It was just like somebody pulled a number out of like like out of the thin blue. It wasn't based on true comps. It wasn't based on any hard data. It just was like somebody was like, you know what? I think that car is worth this. Right. The person also didn't understand the difference between a Traveler and a Scout 2 and the different values. And even crazier as I kind of dissected this appraiser's, this accredited appraiser's, valuation. As crazy as it sounds, 2 days prior, there was 2 days prior to when this person put together the valuation, there was actually a dead on comp transaction that went through the market, right?
Wow.
At the right number. And they didn't reference that. They didn't reference any comps, any data, just made up a number, right? Which really guided Andy incorrectly. BAT was willing to go along with it just because they want inventory up there. And he was in a difficult position. So we had a conversation. I actually dissected his valuation. I did my own valuation, sent it off to him, said, hey, you interested? He's like, nah, I'm not interested. My daughter's off at college, but it's sitting in a garage. Like, I'm okay. I'm not, maybe I'll take it down to the beach. It was, all right, whatever. But where Andy had bought this vehicle was he had seen it in a parking lot, I think in Dewey Beach, Delaware or somewhere. And his daughter was like, I love this thing. I want this as my first car. And Andy, being the coolest dad ever, was like, okay, I'm going to buy it for you as your first car. And he bought it for his daughter. He had the entire body stripped down to metal, repainted, did a 4-wheel brake conversion, updated all the mechanicals on it so it was running good and reliable. And she drove it for 2 years while she was in high school, ended up going off to college. And that's when he decided to sell it. And then I kind of came into the picture. Next thing you know, he wasn't comfortable selling it where I was willing to pay for it. I stayed in contact with him for a good year to 2 years until I finally called him one day and was like, hey, Andy, like I'm traveling up 95.
Are you
This
ready?
is your one and only opportunity. Like, I'm a buyer. I've proven to you that this is the value of it. I know you have a lot more into it, but this is what it's worth. And he's like, you're right, Chris. You are right. He's like, I got to get rid of this thing. Just stop up. If it's everything you wanted it to be and you're willing to pay, like, I'm okay with it. And I rolled in, drove it around. And one thing I'll say is when I drove it around and we started this build, we were going to just kind of, it was a drivability, we were focusing just on the drivability. We had no intention of rebuilding the motor, or we were just going to reseal it. And that motor was quiet. It was powered beautifully. There was no indication that there was any problems with that motor from start to finish. It wasn't smoking. Like, it was perfect.
I drove it for a week, probably after you had it delivered, just in putting like an estimate together, a build plan together. Yeah, I mean, it drove like you would expect.
Yes. Well, that changed a little bit. So let's talk about, so you guys got the truck, you guys did we put together the whole plan, and the plan was just drivability. I was going to do the couple minor body things. There's no rot on the thing. It just has a couple little body issues that need to be touched up. And I was going to do though we wanted to save that awesome blue plaid interior. Unfortunately, I can't save it. It's just a little too worn. It's a 45-year-old interior. It's just a little bit too worn. So I'm going to take care of that.
The hula shark on the dash.
So one thing, it's funny, I just texted Andy, the previous owner. His daughter put that hula shark on there, and I promised him that the hula shark will always live. And
there you go.
The hula shark on the dash will stay forever. So that's the story of where this thing came from. Andy being the coolest girl dad ever, bought that for his daughter to drive in high school. I hope you guys do the same thing. I know you both have daughters, right? But so it gets you guys, and the plan is just basically to go through the truck, do fluids, filters, reseal anything that needed to be sealed, and just some minor stuff, lift it, tires, wheels, steering. It was really focused around the engine, powertrain, suspension, and braking and steering systems. And it was relatively
we had some interior
minor
stuff to do. We did a carpet kit and radio, and got the speakers working, and got the dash gauges working, just to make it like reliable that you can hop in this thing and fire it up and drive it and not have to guess how much fuel's in it or if it's overheating or not.
That was my big thing is I wanted to keep the original gauges, which we're going to talk about a little bit more was a bigger feat than we expected. So tell me about when you guys got it. So it landed February of this year at your shop, went through it. Like, what was the first impressions? You know, we had talked it through. What was the scope originally?
Yeah, I think it was you had kind of outlined a few things for us that was on maybe a punch list of items that you had wanted us to do. Like I mentioned just a moment ago about interior components that were, cosmetic, new carpet, different seat belts, powder coating the roll cage, addressing, putting a suspension lift on it, a more modern wheel, bigger tires, heavy duty steering, tune-up stuff, and stopping some oil leaks or at that point minimizing oil leaks. And I think that's kind of where the scope of the project started. And I think
the operative word there is started, but also I'm going to tell you, I was going to keep the original polycast turbine wheels. That was do you remember that? We weren't going to replace the wheels. We were just going to lift it and put bigger tires on the original 15-inch polycast turbine wheels because I loved them. They're super rare. But I remember this. You called me one day and you said, Chris, the previous owner had done a four-wheel disc brake conversion, and the clearance between the rear disc brake, rear disc and the inside of that wheel, it's like millimeters, and it
was like the thickness of a paper.
Yeah,
it was so close.
I think you guys were like, it's like too close for comfort. We're gonna have to size up the wheels, which at that point was like, ooh, opportunity knocks. I'm gonna throw some Nomad 501, convoys and salt on there because that's the hottest wheel out there right now. So let's talk about that. So the lift we chose to, and I've talked about this on the podcast, where I've been a big advocate of rough country in the past, as a great value player. But in this particular instance, I actually ended up choosing, what did I end up? Oh, Skyjacker. So Skyjacker had a nice 2-inch suspension lift with the Black Max shocks, which are, give a nicer, softer ride. And we ended up doing that. Didn't we have to replace body bushings, right?
We did do body bushings. Yeah. Some of them were like
stacked. Yeah. Remember, there were stacks of like horse stall matting.
Yeah, because some of the body bushings were so worn.
Yeah, somebody made their own like body lift that was quite sketchy, so we replaced all that with new body mounts. When it comes to old 4-wheel drive leaf sprung suspension, I would say it's tough to find a better company than Skyjacker on that kind of stuff.
Well, too, it's like very era correct,
Yeah,
like,
right.
Skyjacker for a 1980 anything. I mean, it just seems right.
That's what you did.
Yeah.
That's what you did. And so they make a really good leaf spring. And so it was kind of a no-brainer to go with that kit. It was available. And so we ordered and installed that kit. Your Traveler did have some lifted shackles on it. And so, I think the original kit was sold as like a 2.5. And so with the lifted shackles, I think it's probably, maybe 3 or 3.25. Which was nice. I feel like we needed that little bit of extra room because, correct me if I'm wrong, but we snuck 305/70 16s on it. So kind of a wide, chubbed out, fat tire on those Nomads, which looked killer. The Nomads in that salt white with the white and blue exterior of this thing look. It just looks awesome. Chris, is there a place that you're going to have pictures of this thing posted? I guess maybe on your site?
So I will actually eventually just take pictures and post them. So my OCD is like, I am a perfectionist, which is my problem, which is like not a good thing. It's actually a little bit of an issue. And I can't so I did post some pictures of the exterior recently, just on the beach down the street from me.
Yeah.
But until I get those couple things in the body taken care of and the interior done, I'm not going to let the world see this thing. So once that gets done, and it's all going to be done by like the third week of October. So again, like less than a month from now, I'll do like a full walk around and everything, but not until it's like exactly where I want it. Like, because the OCD perfectionist in me, just I have to like I it has to be that way.
But we three know what this thing looks like, and you know the problem with radio is that sometimes it's hard for everybody else to picture it. So it just, you know, it's very easily recognizable. It's all white with a bright blue hard top on it, and then we put these white Nomad wheels on it, and the thing just looks absolutely awesome. Like the perfect balance of retro and modern all at the same time. It's really cool looking.
When I post the post announcing this episode, I'll take the pictures from where it started and where it is now, and I'll throw them in there.
Sweet.
So our listeners can see. Back to the Skyjacker, I will say, like, I'm not going to lie, and nothing against rough country, but there's no way I'm putting another rough country lift in any of my vehicles. Like, I'm very impressed for the week I've been driving this truck. Like, I'm very, very impressed with the Skyjacker. You know, it's a middle of the road. You know, I've used rough country before on one end on the value side, and I've used Rubicon Express on the insanely expensive side, and, you know, been underwhelmed on the with the Rubicon Express on the insanely expensive side, and been decently satisfied for the money on the lower end of the spectrum. But, you know, Skyjacker kind of falls in the middle, and I was pretty impressed. Like, I've been very impressed with it, so I appreciate that kit. But along with that, we had to do brake lines, drop pitman arm, and a bunch of other stuff too, right?
Yeah. You want to get into that a little bit? Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty standard, I would say, when you send something up that height, doing extended brake lines, drop pitman arm, especially on a leaf sprung vehicle. Those are almost necessary components.
And we do stainless hoses.
Yes,
stainless braided brake hoses at the same time. Yeah,
and I'll give Curtis credit where credit is due. He called me one day and said, "Hey man, these Black Max shocks come with black shift boots. Do you want? I can find blue shift boots that match the blue accent color on the truck." And I was like, "Well, like, we've obviously at this point, you know, when that happened, it kind of like budget had been a little bit stretched." And he's like, "Chris, stop it. It's going to cost like $25." I was like, "Okay, all right, just do it."
Okay, get the bright blue shock boots and let's do it.
Let's do it.
And they look good, right? They look
look great. They look so great, correct, man. But let's talk about those Nomads, because we talked about it earlier, where I couldn't use the turbines. You know, the clearance on the rear disc just wasn't enough, and you know, it was interesting because you and I, as soon as you said, "Chris, you need to do a larger wheel. You have to do an aftermarket wheel." Like, I think simultaneously, because Mike, you were the one that made that call to me. Simultaneously, you and I said the exact same thing. We're like, Nomads. It was like the exact same time. We're like, Nomad 501 convoys in salt white. Like, I think like we were so aligned there, and that was honestly one of the best decisions we made on this truck. It just looks, for lack of better words,
right,
just so sexy. It's just so sexy, man. But once those wheels came in, there was an issue, and Redline, which is the company that owns Nomad, really did a solid by us. So talk about
Raceline.
Raceline. That's what I mean.
Yes.
Raceline. Yeah.
Yep. So they make that Nomad in a 5-on-5.5 bolt pattern in both a 15 and a 16. Obviously, we already talked that the 15 is not going to work because of the rear disc brake. But when you look at the specs of that wheel in a 15 and a 16, the center bores were different by like 2 millimeters. So the center bore, I think, is 4 1/4 on the center bore should be 4 1/4 to fit the big manual lockout external hub in the front. And the 15 was right, and the 16 was like 3 millimeters
the 15
shy.
Would also have had the pass-through cap, so it would have had the bore go the whole way through the wheel, where the 16 had a snap-in cap, so the even though it was bored out larger on the backside, it wasn't the whole way through. So with the lockout, you could never get that wheel on.
So I reached out to our rep at Raceline, whose name was Jose. Absolutely awesome to work with. Understood our issue. I found it odd that the 16-inch wheel was even sold like that. I feel like it's an engineering mistake because I don't know what it would fit, if anything. And so he's like, yeah, no, I get it. We packed up the wheels, shipped them to him. They machined them out for us at no charge and shipped them back. And, we had to pay for freight, but, it worked out. So I think you're probably the only guy with the Scout running that 16-inch wheel. And I'm glad that we put the extra effort into making it all happen because, we could have pivoted at that point to something different. But, man, the salt white wheel, like that Nomad wheel really captures that vintage modern balance that I think you're going after with your Scout and especially in white. I don't know that there was any better option out there. So I'm glad that we stuck to it. And, with the white letter BFGs that we wrapped on it, it just looked great. It looked great.
And I don't know if you remember, I had originally spec'd out General Grabbers, and because I love the classic look of General Grabbers. And again, in that same conversation, you said to me, and this is why I always appreciate your expertise. You're like, Chris, BFGs are like $20 more expensive per tire. Just stop it. Like, we're getting BFGs. And I was like, you're okay. You're right. Like, you're right.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm happy with how that turned out. A little extra work, a little longer time, but all for the better.
The stance looks amazing. It drives like an absolute champ. But we also did a lot of other work when we're talking about, that was the suspension. But we actually also have to mention one of the other big things we did with the suspension to reinforce it is the weakest point in any Scout, whether it's a Scout 2, Traveler, or Terra, is those the front rear spring hangers. Those things are weak. They break off the frame all the time. It's a mess. But Binder Boneyard, our friend Dan Hayes out in Oregon, Binder Boneyard actually has a gusset that explain that gusset and how it works. It's pretty interesting.
Sure, Curtis, you want to get into that?
Yeah, so that's just going to wedge between the leaf spring hanger and the frame and just kind of make a triangle there to add some support to that so that it gets more contact patch on that frame and can't rip off. In fact, your original Scout that you had sent here, the 73, it already had them on it.
Oh.
So they're a very common thing on them to be installed.
Because they had ripped off already.
Right. Yeah.
Fortunately, the 80 Traveler, they hadn't ripped off. They were still in good original condition, but
Still
we
good,
strengthened it up. And man, it looks, the stance is great. It drives beautifully. I was with my wife this weekend. We were doing, 75 miles an hour up the Garden State Parkway, and I took my hands off the wheel and it drove dead straight. She even commented like, wow, this is not like jarring. It really is very comfortable. And I said, okay, good. Which I couldn't agree anymore. But that kind of, I guess, that encompasses all the work we did suspension wise, braking wise. Was there any the braking had been done? Was there any major braking work we did?
No, just hoses.
Yeah.
Nothing really changed. That you'd already had that disc brake conversion on it. So, I know we spent a fair amount of time obviously rebuilding the engine. And so we can maybe talk a little bit about engine, transmission, and transfer case, because I remember the day when Curtis, I think he sent me a picture of Eric's hand in your oil pan with all the shrapnel in it. And I was like, did you send this to Chris? He's like, yup. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, now we've turned a corner. Like
we changed we pivoted a lot there, and I'll remember that day forever because I was getting my daily updates from Curtis, and all I got with no explanation, no nothing, was just 2 pictures, right, of Eric with his hand, like you just said, and I'm going to post this picture, right, with his hand in the oil pan. And keep in mind, all of our listeners, all of us right here had driven this truck. It was powering. There was no noise. There was no smoke, no nothing. And his hand in that oil pan was just full of metal shrapnel, just bearings, and not little pieces, like just chunks.
Yeah.
And we talked through that because you got to remember, this was not our goal. This drivability, the scope was not to rebuild anything. It was just kind of just do fluids and filters and reseal where needed. And that just changed the whole timeline, budget, everything. I think we had talked about LS swapping at one point, and budget wise, we could make it work, but the timeline was out of control. And then, like, in the end, we chose to rebuild that engine and take that 345 out. So you guys want to talk about that process? Because I was actually amazed how quickly you guys got that done. It was like 3 weeks. You guys pulled that motor out, had it rebuilt, and back in within like 3 weeks. And machine shops are a dying, breed in themselves, but to have a relationship with a machine shop that could rebuild something like that in that period of time and do it well is like unheard of. So go from like, we decided to rebuild to there.
Sure. So, Curtis and I both went to high school locally here in this small town, right? And so we went to high school with a guy that his family has had a machine shop forever, I guess. And
since the dawn of machine shops.
And so thank you to Leedy's Engine Machine. They helped us out big time. I called them, said, hey, this is what we're working with. Can you rebuild it? He called me back, said, yeah, parts are readily available. I've got the availability, within a couple weeks to get this thing turned around. And so it was like, well, let's not waste any time. Let's get the thing yanked out. We dropped it off, and they did what they needed to do. Fortunately, most of those parts are readily available, and they did all the machine work for us. And even after the install was done, helped us with a few little leaks that we had. And I would say overall, the experience in working with them was great. They did what they said they were going to do in the time that they said they were going to do it for the price they said they were going to do it for. And so it just made it really easy to work with them. It was a pleasure. So thank you to
I know
Leedy's.
They did talk about the crank possibly being an issue if we were going to have to get one of those. Luckily, that didn't happen. They were saying that if it would have been rebuilt previously and the crank was machined, that they weren't sure they were going to be able to get one. So this was its first rebuild. So that was good.
Yeah.
That worked out in our favor.
Yes. It did.
So moving down the line, the transmission, I don't know that we did any internal work on the transmission, but like those 727s always seemed to leak. And so that was one of the punchless items that we were kind of chasing at the very end there, was to get this thing to stop leaking. And so I know we did a lot of gaskets, obviously transpan gasket,
bushing,
torque converter, bushing and seal, shifter gaskets.
Yep.
So, working through that, and then we ended there on the transfer case. And I know that 80, it was the only year for a Dana 300. And so we got, I think we did shifter seals on that for both shift rails. We also did there's like Novak makes these neat billet covers for that. So we did that. And I think we got the thing, which is pretty amazing to say, knock on wood, that, we got the thing pretty dry. When I say that I don't know that it really leaks a whole lot, except for the fluid film that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's dry. It runs like a champion. We essentially just, the trans and the transfer case just got resealed, and we had actually spec'd out those Novak, the plates right out
from
of
the beginning.
Yeah, for all of our listeners out there, the Dana 300 was only available in the 1980 Scout. But there's a difference. When we talk about Dana 300s, we talk about, everybody thinks of the Jeep Dana 300 that was, prominent in the CJs in the 80s, late 70s into the 80s. But Dana made a unique Dana 300 just for the Scout. It's actually, it has some variation in the case, but it's unique, 1 year only in the Scout. And we ended up adding those Novak plates, because those Dana 300s, they always leaked out of the plates. Those plates like warped, and Novak has those heavy duty ones that they're extended capacity too, right?
Yeah, they are. It was interesting when I placed the order for that because Novak actually wanted to see pictures. So I crawled underneath your Scout and took pictures of the like PTO output plate, and I guess I don't know what you'd call that, like oil pan or something like that on there. And they got us the right parts and gaskets, and so that worked out. It worked out really well. But it's kind of like a hybrid, if you will, like all the little Jeep guys know that the Dana 20 has a Texas pattern on it to bolt onto the transmission, and the Dana 300 has a round 6 pattern. So this is a Dana 300 with a Texas pattern. So it makes it kind of a unique transfer case. But, we were able to work through that and get this thing so it's pretty dry underneath, which is hard to say for any vintage 4x4.
Yep, I couldn't agree anymore. And then let's move on to the gauges real quick, because that was like, and again, I don't want to. We're going to say this we're going to be very politically correct, but for all of us out there that have built trucks or worked on old vehicles, unfortunately, here in the U.S., we are plagued by very poor quality offshore, and I'm not going to name the country or anything, offshore parts that are manufactured offshore. And when it came to the gauges, we got plagued there pretty badly. Curtis, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So we bought a CVR. Supposed to be a updated one,
which is a constant voltage regulator.
Correct. Yes. So it needs to see 5 volts to those gauges. And this thing takes the 12 volts and reduces it down so that those gauges operate properly. The one that we kept being provided, I don't really know where we got it from, nor is it really important. It just kept failing almost immediately. I mean, we would run it here in the shop. It would be working. I would take it out of the driveway, go down to the square, which is a half of a mile. And by that point, it would already have failed. We went through 2 of those probably, and it was like, okay, we got to come up with a different plan. So I ended up calling IH Parts America and Michael there. He kind of helped guide me through using a CVR from a Mustang through a Dennis Carpenter part number that he provided with me. And he was super. They don't have a kit to do this, but they're working on it and they're going to use this CVR. So he kind of guided me through how to make that work. And it worked perfectly.
Shout out to IH Parts America too.
Absolutely, they
were
helped
key.
us out a lot in here. I would say before this project of working with you, I was not super familiar with Scouts, and I learned a lot doing this project, and that's refreshing for me a little bit. I've been doing this so long that I kind of enjoy the challenge and the learning. But man, having someone reliable that can give you quality information, IH Parts America was that for me through this. So I really enjoyed talking to them and appreciate them highly.
Yeah, they were a huge part of helping us throughout this entire process. So I can't thank IH Parts America enough for that. So got the heat working, the air conditioning working, all the gauges are working, all the lights are working, engines rebuilt, powertrain, the trans and transfer case are sealed. We have all new suspension, brake lines, drop pitman arm, wheels, tires. The only thing left is steering, which for all of anybody that's ever driven a Scout knows that. And even this is true with the Jeep CJs, like they are not known for being tight or steering well. And I alluded to it earlier when I mentioned that I was on the Garden State Parkway the other day, driving 75 miles an hour and could just take my hands right off the wheel and it stayed dead straight. And there was a lot that went into that. So let's talk about the steering and how we got it to that point.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a relatively simple steering system. So it has just a separate tie rod and drag link with steering damper. And so we just replaced it all. And so we've got new parts. Those came from, I believe, Anything Scout. And it was a completely new heavy duty tie rod and drag link. And it worked out really well. I believe we got a steering damper from Skyjacker to match the rest of the shocks.
We also did a updated steering
box.
Oh,
that's right.
And
I forgot about the box.
we did the steering
pump
shaft as well. And the pump.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So all of it.
Yeah.
And didn't we convert the steering shaft?
That's correct. Yeah. So it uses a rag joint originally, which are known to be a problem. You just have like what were we talking about earlier? Horse stall mat. That's essentially what's in between these two couplers, and that just wears out and gets a lot of play in it. And it's now swapped to a universal joint like any normal modern vehicle would have.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing that I think was a huge value add, and these are well known in the Scout community, is the straight steer frame braces. You guys want to talk about how those kind of play in? Because we put one of those in.
That's right. That went underneath of the engine. I can't say I'm super knowledgeable on what that does necessarily, but
I think what it does is it really stiffens up that front clip. And makes a huge difference in how tight that front end
I assume
really
it's similar to like unibody stiffeners on an XJ, where it's just going to kind of make things more rigid up there to take away any sort of play that might be in there.
Like in the front frame horns, keeping that thing dialed.
So it runs, it drives like what we set out to do, though we pivoted and, we were well over double the budget, double the time frame, which just happens, man. It's nobody's fault other than it's an old truck. And when you drop an oil pan to reseal the oil pan and find a whole bunch of metal in it, like that just happens, right? Yeah,
that's right.
We got all the way to the finish line. Everything was good to go. And I think, Curtis, do you remember what the last call was on the one issue we had?
Was it with the fuel pump?
The fuel pump and also the radiator.
Oh, yes, the radiator. Yeah. Yeah, it was like the only thing we hadn't replaced at that point, and it was leaking.
Yep.
So we
and it was a relatively new aluminum radiator that was in there. And
so that's also something that I think that we find here to be a problem. Aluminum aftermarket radiators, I don't know if it's the way that they mount in vehicles, how they're welded up, but they seem to not last very long and leak kind of regularly. So what we elected to do on your Scout was go with a copper brass replacement, which seemed to last a really, really long time. I was able to find one in a like Scout supplier in Ohio, some guy that just sells parts. It was the last one that they had, or we were going to be waiting for like 12 weeks till they could make more. So that was fortunate.
That's good. And then the fuel pump, I think, actually it wasn't a fuel pump issue. It was a offshore built PCV valve that ended up putting back pressure into the fuel pump, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So there's like a little weep hole on the fuel pump that would like leak if there was too much crankcase pressure, and the PCV valve had just not functioned properly and would cause that fuel pump to leak oil out of that weep hole.
Yeah. So all done. Last thing we did was what was the last? Oh, I mean, there were a couple other miscellaneous things with Mike you talked about. We did the stereo, the carpet kit, powder coated the roll bar, changed the seat belts. And then we decided undercoating was like a big, what are we going to do when we undercoat it? Because it was, the underside of it was good. It was clean, no rot, just a little bit of surface scaling, but nothing. It was very, very minor, nothing crazy. And talk about the decision that we made for undercoating, because I actually really, really like the decision that we ended up making.
Yeah, and so I think the important part with this is that this is a driver, right? This is a vehicle that you intend on using. This isn't like an investment grade rotisseried museum piece. And so I think for although it's nice, it's important to make sure that we preserve it. And so for us, when we talk about preservation, I think the best solution out there for keeping a vehicle rust free is something that works like a penetrating oil or penetrating fluid. And so we offer a service here called Fluid Film. It's a product that anybody could really get at Napa, but we've got a really unique application process. And Fluid Film, believe it or not, is a lanolin based product, which means it's derived from sheep's wool grease, which sounds weird in itself, but it is a penetrating oil that's applied wet. It is indeed clear and has rust inhibitors in it. So we use a really long wand, and we can spray down inside frame channels, up inside body cavities, all over the place. And it works as a continual, a continual penetrating lubricant to make sure that we keep rust away for as long as possible. Most daily driver vehicles we see need to apply, I would say, every 2 years or so. But man, this thing, hopefully we can keep it preserved as long as possible.
That's cool. Yeah, it worked out. And actually, got to give credit to Curtis. So Fluid Film comes in two different colors, black and clear. And Curtis actually was the one that came up with this, where we used both colors because we had so many new cool suspension components that we didn't want to just spray black. So Curtis was like, hey, I want to do the underbody, axles, and a few other things in black, but all the new suspension components I want to spray in clear. And Curtis, that was an awesome decision. It looks amazing. It's in my garage right now. I'm a big advocate of I had never heard of the product before you guys presented it to me. It really turned out great. It's in my garage right now. Kind of just when you first apply it, it smells like, pretty rough, but after a couple days it dissipates. So I've already it started to dissipate. But one thing I want to mention, we've mentioned several different manufacturers and parts suppliers on this episode. And I want to be very clear that none of these manufacturers or parts suppliers sponsored anything. I paid for everything, full retail. Mike and his team at Mount Zion, there were no gifts giving or no sponsorship. I paid full retail for every part, every, hour of labor, the whole 9 yards. Nothing was handed to me because ironically, I got a bunch of messages when I posted the truck the other day. It was like, oh, it must be nice, when you can build a truck with sponsorship. And well, guess what? I didn't build this with sponsorship. I built it with every hard-earned dollar.
And sweat.
Yes, yep. I wrote a check for every man hour, every part in this, fully 100%. But, I'm happy to mention all these part suppliers and highlight Mount Zion Offroad because, all the parts that we use them because we felt that they were the best in breed out there. And the team at Mount Zion did such an amazing job. I really can't thank you guys enough.
Thanks a bunch. We really enjoyed it.
Yeah, totally. Totally loved it.
Yep.
Until the next time when we have the next project, we'll have you back on. But I can't thank you guys enough, and wish you guys all the best. For all of our listeners out there, make sure you check out Mount Zion Offroad online, social channels, YouTube. Thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks a bunch, Chris.